Alrighty, welcome back everyone, it's Garland here bringing you another Neverwinter video. Today's video is mainly going to be focused on my class, which is the Warlock. So if you don't play the Warlock, feel free to disregard the video, but if you're interested to watch the video, then be my guest. I'm basically just going to be reading off the patch notes, kind of theory crafting a little bit, and going over and giving my own personal opinion on the upcoming update, which I really haven't got into very much yet. The Mod 10 is going to be released next Tuesday. Today is Friday. So, like I said, it's going to be about the Warlock. Let's just jump right into the class balance patch notes here for the Warlock. First up, we have some artifact class features. All-Consuming Curse, it's now actually going to work with All-Consuming Curse rank 4. What they're talking about is on your offhand, I believe. If we switch over to the offhand here, I'm actually controlling this one-handed because I do have papers in my hand. So let's go down here to Artifact. As you can see, All-Consuming Curse here. Sometimes it hasn't been working. The crit severity, the 5%. For whatever reason, I'm not sure. So it should work in Mod 5 now. Everything should be entwined with the actual power plus the artifact. So all the bonuses should actually, in fact, be working. They're also talking about the power on All-Consuming Curse. If we look at All-Consuming Curse here real quickly, the rank 4, the lesser curse damage, yeah, that for some reason it wasn't getting the 50% increase, so all that's going to be fixed, which is a big deal because I currently do use that. Deadly Curse now deals the damage it states in the tooltip instead of considerably less, so your people that use Deadly Curse are actually going to get full advantage of it. Flames of Empowerment is updated to match the new version of Flames of Empowerment. It further increases the damage of flames by 1% per stack. It's not going to be too horrible for people that use it for Fury. Prince of Hell now increases damage resistance by 5% instead of defense rating. The way the game's currently going is they're kind of flip-flopping, they're kind of changing. The defense rating is slowly becoming into damage resistance, which also goes in line with some of the Guardian Fighter changes. Snuff Out, which I don't think I've ever used, it now causes Snuff Out to have a 50% chance to grant an additional Soul Spark when a target dies within range instead of 150 lifesteal. So they're taking the lifesteal rating off, and now you're getting a Soul Spark, which now maybe actually might be useful. Accursed Souls now applies a lesser curse to all affected targets in addition to its existing effects. Accursed Soul is decent. I never really use it that much, but now it also applies a lesser curse, so if I do decide to play Damnation in Mod 10, I might be looking into Accursed Souls because lesser curse is going to be a big deal with Damnation as far as damage goes. Some of the powers here, which is a big one here, is Arms of Hadar. It's actually listed twice, so I'm not sure. It says the damage increase is 14%. And then damage increased by 40%. So I don't know if the overall damage is going to be increased by 14%, and then when you have it at rank 4, it'll be totally increased by 40%, which is a very big deal. Arms of Hadar got a very big buff. If I decide to play Fury, I definitely will be using Arms of Hadar. It does have a target cap of 5 now instead of 6. The prone time is now 1 second instead of ending almost immediately. When you used it before, the prone effect was irrelevant. Also, when they first did the class balances, they decided that to mess up the spell, Arms of Hadar was actually glitching some of the boss mechanics. Well, that should be fixed for the console release. The range was also increased from 35, was 29, so that's a pretty big deal as well. Okay, Blades of the Vanquished Armies, this is another big one, whether I use it for Damnation or Fury. Increase the radius to 13, which is up from 11. It also, here's the big one, it no longer locks you in place while you're casting. Basically what that means is now you can cast Blades while you're moving, which is huge because before you had to literally stand still to cast Blades and then move. It no longer toggles off when you're stunned or dazed. So, like, if you got hit by a stun, Blades would disappear. It sucked. Well, it doesn't happen anymore, which is huge. It increases your deflection chance while active. Amount of deflection increases with each rank, starting at 10% at rank 1 and reaching 25% at rank 4, which is also very big for PvPers. You might want to look at blades for PvP just because of the reflection is going to be superb. And then there's some FX sounds that we're not going to care about. Borrowed Time is getting a change. It's just clarification to the tooltips. It's class feature only, triggers a Soul Spark. The Soul Sparks trigger, and they will heal you at the end of combat. There was also a glitch with Borrowed Time that was stacking infinite number of sparks that should be fixed for console, but you might want to keep an eye on that. Brood of Hadar. The Broodlings now deal additional damage over time. Brood of Hadar is actually going to be a decent daily. Like I said, the Broodlings are now going to deal additional DOT damage equal to double the initial damage they deal. Curse Bite damage increased by 33%. Rank 4 of this power now properly reduces the cooldown by 1 second. Dark One's Blessing, I'm not even going to go over, we don't care. Deadly Curse, increase the base damage dealt when applying your Warlock's Curse, but reduce the rank up benefits to 10% per rank, down from 12%. Once again, I don't use Deadly Curse, I think it's useless. Okay, here's another important one, guys. Dread Theft. It no longer consumes curses. Instead, now has a similar effect as Curse Synergy. While you are using Dread Theft, affected curse targets take increased damage from all sources, and you gain damage resistance based on the number of curse targets hit. Both of these effects stop occurring when you stop maintaining Dread Theft. So basically what this means is instead of being a pure DPS spell now, it's actually going to be a buff debuff spell as well as doing DPS. I think most Damnations might stick with it. Fury's probably not going to go with it. If you have two Warlocks in the party, one of you might want to use Dread Theft for the damage increase and the damage resistance, while the other one does pure DPS, or however you want to do it. The Dread Theft cap is now at 3 instead of 5. However, the amount of damage resistance granted by each stack has been increased. Also updated the rank information to properly state that it increases the damage resistance debuff by 5% per rank instead of 3%. Eldritch Blast is an at-will. It increases the damage of the first hit of this combo by 33%. It also has a reduced activation time of the second attack, down from 0.6 seconds. It used to be 0.78 seconds. Eldritch Blast is actually going to be a decent at-will now. I probably still won't use it, but moving on here. Essence Defiler is increased activation time of the first strike slightly, but decreased overall activation time for the combo. 1.8 seconds down from 2.2 seconds. However, it's going to still be an overall DPS increase of 22%. So Essence Defiler is probably still going to be the main at-will for Damnation. Some feats. Let's move on into the feat section here. Aura of Despair. No big deal here. I think most of these are going to be Temptation. Yeah, Aura of Despair we don't really care about. We're not going to go over Temptation, to be honest. Creeping Death is going to be an important one here. That's the end at the Paragon for Fury. Creeping Death can now proc when hitting a target affected by any of your curses instead of just Warlock's Curse and Tyrannical Curse. Lesser Curse and Warlock's Bargain will now also enable Creeping Death. That's huge. Creeping Death, instead of triggering off any necro damage, this feat now triggers off any damage dealt by your at-will, encounter, and daily powers. Basically, everything that you cast will proc Creeping Death now. More powers now work with this, such as fire damage with Hellish Rebuke, Killing Flames, and Emulation Spirits. All of those will, in fact, proc Creeping Death, which is just insane. Creeping Death now also deals its damage over 6 seconds, 4 times once every 1.5 seconds, instead of over 8 seconds, 4 times once every 2 seconds. So they increase the DPS again. The damage dealt by this power is now properly considered a DOT. So basically Creeping Death is going to be a good bit of DPS overall now. Critical Promise is somewhere over here. the damage is increased to 10% per rank. It's as you can see, it's 2% per rank for a total of 10. It's actually going to be 10% per rank. That's insane. That's going to be a 50% increase of just your weapon damage. However, you know, it still might be viable. Like I said, we're just doing a little theory crafting here. Daughter's Promise, which is pretty garbage to be overall. It basically hits up to 3 targets now, and the radius has been increased to 25, up from 15. Let's see here where we got. I wish they went in order. It would have been better. Executioner's Gift. It no longer progs a second damage effect. Instead, it directly increases the damage of your at-will and encounter powers when a target is missing health. So it's still an increase in DPS overall. Gatekeeper's Empowerment, we're not going to go over. There's some more temptation stuff from Hope Stiller. We're not going to go over. Okay, Killing Curse. Killing Curse, yeah, right here. Killing Curse, the damage is increased from 3% to rank instead of 1%, which is not bad. So when you're attacking a cursed target, you're going to deal 3, 6, 9, 12, 15% of your weapon damage instead of the 5%. So that might not be too bad. Mocking Spirit. Your Soul Puppet's going to gain an additional 10% of your max HP per rank. It's pretty important if you're playing Damnation. Here's one I definitely want to go over here. Parting Blasphemy. The damage is increased to 10% per rank, which was only initial 1.2%. So instead of 6%, you're going to get, what, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of your weapon damage again. One thing I do want to mention with Parting Blasphemy is that all you Warlocks that were using the Young Yeti and getting the Yeti to proc so much, it's because you were taking damage from Parting Blasphemy. However, this is fixed. It says fixed an issue where sometimes the caster would take damage from Parting Blasphemy. So you will not take damage from Parting Blasphemy anymore, hence not proccing your Yeti is enough. So you might want to switch the Yeti out. That's up to you. If you still jump into the fray of the battle and take damage, then the Yeti still might work for you. Relentless Curse, we don't care. Soul Bonding, we don't care. Soul Desecration. Soul Desecration is the last feat here. Soul Desecration increases the movement speed of your Soul Puppet. And they also updated the tooltip to say permanent. They take permanent out because the Soul Puppet can still die, so they took permanent out of the tooltip. Soul Reaping now grants 1% lifesteal. We don't care about that. Sparkbinder now also causes your Immolation Spirits to gain an additional 5% of your max HP. It's pretty important. Spirit Fire, the damage dealt by this feat is now fire damage instead of physical damage. Spirit Fire, the damage dealt by this feat was previously dealing a percent of your weapon damage plus a base damage value, which led to the feat description being inaccurate. The base damage has been removed and the weapon damage dealt has been increased to 15% per rank. This result is a buff for the weapons above common quality. So where is Spirit Fire? Spirit Fire's right here. So it says 50% of weapon damage, but like I said, it's an overall increase of 15% per rank. So it's 10% right now, but it will start at 15%. Alrighty, let's move it around, skipping through all the temptation stuff, and then they jump back to the powers. Like I said, these patch notes are all over the place. Fury Bolt, which is down here. The damage increased is 33%. That's a pretty big number. No longer causes a cast bar to appear for part of the power's activation. Reduce base recharge time to 12 seconds, down from 14, so you'll be able to cast it faster. Reduce the total activation time. So instead of being 1.75 seconds, it's going to be 1.1 second between casts. The Curse Consume effect has been replaced with Curse Energy. Curse Energy now causes secondary targets to take full damage. Alright, let's move on to Flames of Empowerment. No longer increases your damage when your AP is full. Instead applies a debuff to your target when you hit them with an at-will power. This debuff increases the damage you deal to the target by 2%. It's 1% per rank now to a max of 5%, and it stacks up to 3 times. It's a pretty big deal for Flames of Empowerment if you play Fury. Flames of Pathiagos, the overall damage for this, where is it at? Should be up here somewhere, right here. This daily, it was pretty weak. They are increasing it. The damage increase is going to be 40% of what it is now, so you should see 60k at least on the tip bar, if not more. Gatekeeper's Empowerment, we don't care. Gates of Hell, we don't care. Not going to go over that. Let's move on to Hadar's Grasp, because that's a pretty important power as well. Let's click on down here. Okay, so you see the tooltip here. Previously, the curse consumed behavior stated that it doubled the duration of the left. However, this is not what it did. Instead, it increased the duration by 50% and applied a stacking debuff that would lower the target's damage resistance from armor by 3% for every stack. Basically, what Hadar's Grasp is currently doing in the game is that if you cast it and then you cast your Warlock's Curse on it, it would increase the duration by 50%. That's why a lot of people are running around using Hadar's Grasp for boss battles, and then Blades for trash mobs, or they might even use Hadar's during trash mobs too. It all depends on the Warlock. However, this is being fixed. It was a huge deal in PvP as well, because you were getting a 50% extra stun, basically. But all that's getting fixed. So, Hand of Blight is a pretty big deal, as I do use that. Changes the range of the melee version of the power to 15. Previously, it reported as having a 20 range, but actually would only work at 10 range. So yeah, Hand of Blight is getting a small fix. The tooltip says that it has a 20, but it was actually a 10. So they're just going to fix it and give it a flat 15 range, which is good. Let's see, the rank up description is being restated. Instead of a debuff +1, or actually it's going to say debuff +1 instead of buff +1. It causes a debuff, not a buff, so I don't know why it ever stated in the tooltip. I see in the tooltip here it says buff +1. Yeah, that never should have been. It's a debuff +1%. The activation time is also going to be cut down. The combo is going to be 0.25 seconds. The overall DPS of the ranged combo is going to increase by 10%, so that's a pretty big deal. I don't use Horror Storm, however, we're going to mention it really quickly. The overall damage is being increased by 50%, which is a pretty big deal. You might want to look into Horror Storm. Mainly if you're a PvPer, you might want to look into Horror Storm. The damage is getting a pretty big buff. Hellish Rebuke, which I don't have because I'm not Fury, but Hellish Rebuke is also getting a little rework. The DOT damage increased another 50%, which is huge. Hellish Rebuke is going to be a very good at-will for Fury. It no longer refreshes the duration of the debuff when the target attacks you. Instead, deals another blast of damage equal to the initial damage dealt by the power. This additional damage can only be dealt to the target once every 2 seconds. So just overall, increased DPS. It also says it quadrupled the damage of the initial hit. Quadrupled, guys. Your initial hit on Hellish Rebuke is going to be very nice. It's going to be a 20% overall on the DOT, which already stacks on top of the 50%. So Hellish Rebuke is going to be one hell of an at-will power. They also reduced the activation time from 0.8, which is down from 1.2. So like I said, just pure DPS increase. Let's move on to Emulation Spirits, which I do use, and I don't know if I'm going to continue to use. Did I pass it? Oh, there it is. Emulation Spirits are now able to attack sooner after being summoned. Usually right now when you cast them, it takes a little bit for them to start attacking. Now they should attack a lot sooner. And the big one here is no longer consumes soul sparks or gains bonus damage or damage resistance based on consuming them. So if you had full sparks and you would cast MO Spirits, it takes all your sparks. It sucked. It claimed that it gave it more damage, which it didn't. So it was basically just screwing you over. The only reason to cast MO Spirits is that if you didn't have any soul sparks. Now, instead, base damage of the summoned critters attacks have been increased by 50%, and their attacks have a 50% chance to grant you a Soul Spark. So now, instead of actually taking your Soul Sparks away, there's a 50% every chance that they attack that you will get a Soul Spark. They no longer receive bonus damage resistance, and they now always have 50% damage resistance. Their old base was 34, so their damage resistance now is increased to a total of 50%. Their HP, they no longer have 25k in all circumstances. Instead, they have a base amount of HP based on their level and gain 25% of the caster's max HP. Their max HP can be further modified by the Sparkbinder feat. Infernal Spears, we don't care about it, but they did fix the glitch with it. So it's no longer attacks enemies that get near you, instead sends a sphere out to targets that attack you. There was a glitch with the Owlbear and low crit builds, and PvP was just a joke with a Warlock using an Owlbear companion plus Infernal Spears. They were able to basically one-shot people while not even doing anything, while just running past them, but that's all fixed. Killing Flames, the minimum damage increased 67%. The maximum damage is unchanged, but damage ramping has increased, such that maximum damage is now reached when the target is at or below 25% HP instead of 0 HP. So Killing Flame still is going to do a lot of damage. However, with the Guardian Fighter changes, you're not going to see Warlocks doing 600 million crit hits by exploiting the Killing Flames, Murderous Flames combo. Like, that is being taken out. That is one of the major fixes for the Warlock. Killing Flames rank 4 of this power now properly reduces the cooldown by 1 second. It used to, if you had rank 4 of Killing Flames, it actually increased it by 2 seconds instead of decreasing the cooldown. So it's just minor bugs in the game that should have been gone a long time ago, but whatever. Lesser Curse, the damage increased totally is going to be 25% on all Lesser Curses. The Warlock mechanic, Curse Consume, it's going to be renamed to Warlock's Curse Consume. It now only triggers from the Consumes Warlock Curse, not Lesser Curse or Tyrannical. This will allow you to have more control over when you want these effects and won't remove curses that you don't want removed. Murderous Flame now works with Killing Flames rank 4, as I mentioned. Most people didn't have Killing Flames rank 4, or they did and they didn't realize that that was bad, but Murderous Flames now does interact properly with Killing Flames. Like I said, no one's going to be getting those 600 million hit crits anymore. No Pity, No Mercy is going to be a Fury feat. We're not going to go over it. Pillar of Power is a Fury. We are going to go over it. This power is at a slight rework. Now always casts under your feet instead of needing to be placed. Recharge time now starts as soon as you cast it instead of when the effect ends, and has been reduced to 10 seconds, down from 15, which is huge. You may only have one pillar active at a time. Recasting it while it is still active will move it to your current location. The effects of Pillar have changed as well. In addition to increasing your damage, it now also grants you damage resistance while you stand within it. The Pillar no longer builds up and explodes when an enemy enters it. Instead, it lowers the enemy's damage and damage resistance and deals damage to them. Pillar of Power is basically going to be the bread and butter of a Hellbinder Fury in Mod 10. You are going to basically cast this on top of a boss. You're going to stand in it as long as you can. And, I mean, like I said, it reduces their damage and damage resistance, plus it buffs you. You can't go wrong with Pillar of Power. You're going to be spamming that non-stop, I would imagine. The radius is increased from 13 up from 10. Power of the 9 now extends the new damage resistance buff in addition to the damage buff. Power of the 9 is basically the feat for Pillar of Power. Prince of Hell no longer increases your armor pen by 10%. Instead, directly increases your resistance ignored and lifesteal chance. Let's go over Shadow Slip. There are going to be some changes to Shadow Slip. Increases your speed by 15%. Now provides damage immunity for 1 second after activation and loses 20% damage resistance per second while it's active, down to a minimum of 40%. Basically, every time you Shadow Slip, you're going to be immune to everything for 1 second. So if you have to get out of a situation at the last second, you will have that 1 second immunity every time you Shadow Slip. And then it does downgrade, so you still have damage resistance while Shadow Slipping, but it won't be 100%. I think it says here it starts off granting 60% damage resistance when activated, and then this value is decreased every 5%, every half a second, down to a minimum of 40%. So no matter if you're Shadow Slipping, period, you're going to have 40% damage resistance. Snuff out, we don't care. Okay, let's talk about soul puppets for Damnation. They're no longer affected by various buffs intended for difficult enemy critters. This includes epic dungeon buffs, certain heroic encounter buffs, and some other buffs of this nature. So this is where the fix for the Warlock class is coming into play, where the soul puppets were, doing millions and millions of damage. Well, that was never intended to happen. So they are fixing the soul puppets. Soul puppets are still going to do a great deal of damage. That's their job in the game, especially for Damnation. But they're not going to do, like I said, millions and millions of damage anymore. They no longer have a max HP of 25k in all circumstances. Instead, they have a base amount of HP based on their level and gain 25% of the caster's max HP. Then their max HP can be further modified by the Mocking Spirit's feat. So basically, the soul puppets are basically getting the same mechanics as Emulation Spirits go as far as HP. No longer innately receive an additional 10% damage resistance. Instead, they now gain bonus damage resistance equal to the amount of non-temporary damage resistance the caster has. So basically, it just scales off your character. Basically, instead of having a flat out rate of 10% damage resistance, your soul puppet's going to scale off your damage resistance. No longer sometimes receive large amounts of damage resistance from Immolation Spirits. There was a minor glitch when you add Immolation Spirits up, your soul puppet would basically become unkillable for a short amount of time, just because they would get large amounts of damage resistance from interacting between Immolation Spirits. Now gain 100% of your non-temporary deflection, lifesteal, and resistance percentage. So all the lifesteal you have on your character, your soul puppet is also going to get, basically. So Damnation is still going to be able to survive, put it that way. Let's go down to Soul Scorch here, which is basically the bread and butter for Damnation as far as DPS goes. Now properly generates action points. There were issues with Soul Scorch that your AP gain wasn't working properly. Well, apparently that's fixed in Mod 10. Soul Sparks. No longer display the word Soul Sparks whenever you gain one. So no more Soul Spark spam on my screen, thankfully. Soul Sparks no longer immediately consumed when combat ends. Instead, one is consumed every 0.5 seconds you are out of combat. This means at full stacks, which is 30, it would take 15 seconds for them all to be consumed. If you re-enter combat, the passive consumption of Soul Sparks will stop. So this is a very important thing here, especially in Mod 10. As it sits right now, if I'm in a fight and I have full sparks and I leave combat for a few seconds, all my sparks disappear. It sucks. It completely sucks. Now that's no longer going to happen. I'm going to keep my sparks. However, I will lose one spark every half a second I am out of combat. But if I'm at full sparks, as it says, it's going to take 15 full seconds. Well, when I'm dungeon crawling, there's no real 15-second delay in between encounters, so my soul sparks should be able to be maintained, especially when I'm doing things like Epic Demogorgon too. When I complete the first wave and we're waiting for the second boss to spawn, or Demogorgon himself, that middle phase where you have to sit there and wait, well, your soul sparks always are gone. This way I'll be able to go out there and immediately start using them, which is a pretty big deal. And the last and final thing, I think, no, we have two things left I want to talk about here. Tyrannical Curse. This is another major setback for the Warlock. The initial damage dealt by this power will probably be affected by damage buffs and debuffs and immunities. Was actually increasing the damage you deal to the target by 40%. It's stated it's only supposed to be 20%. Well, Tyrannical Curse right now in its form is actually doing 40%. That's why a lot of Warlocks are doing a lot of DPS. It's now properly only increases your damage by 20%. Your regular Warlock's Curse can be placed alongside this power now. However, the damage increase caused by Tyrannical Curse and Warlock's Curse do not stack. There's no real point to stack your curses, to be honest. Your Tyrannical Threat is going to be renamed to Tyrannical Curse. It no longer causes your normal Warlock's Curse to be replaced by Tyrannical Curse. Instead, immediately cast Tyrannical Curse on your target. This means you can no longer have multiple targets affected by Tyrannical Curse at the same time. So what does this mean? If you have Warlock's Curse on a target, you cast Tyrannical, that Warlock's Curse is automatically going to be turned into Tyrannical. So you want to make sure when you're playing around with your Tyrannical that you don't already have any curses out there, otherwise you're going to have the wrong target cursed. You were able to have 3 targets with Tyrannical on it. This isn't the case anymore. You're only going to be able to have 1 target with Tyrannical. It's not a huge deal. They did lower the DPS on it. However, I feel that for boss battles, it's still going to be pretty important. You're still going to be using your Tyrannical Threat. So I don't see the big deal yet. I mean, we'll do some more testing on it, and we'll see what happens. The Imprint Embrace is a garbage spell. No one ever uses it. It's probably not even used in PvP. Well, the damage overall has been increased by 60%, so we're going to see what kind of damage it does. The base recharge time was cut down from 16 seconds to 14 seconds. The activation was cut down from 0.7 to 0.6. And let's talk about Warlock's Bargain fairly quickly here. Warlock's Bargain, the activation time is reduced from 1.3 to 1.1. Updated the tooltip wording to just read Warlock's Bargain is a curse to match the changes to how Curse Consume now works. And then finally, let's talk about Warlock's Curse overall. It no longer grants less of a benefit when on multiple targets. Currently, if you were sitting there running around cursing multiple targets, it would have less of an effect. That's changed now, so if you do run around and have 3 Warlock's Curses, you're going to gain the benefit from all 3. Now has a shorter activation time, but you can still move freely while using this power. This is to resolve an issue that could arise during rapid reapplications of a power with no activation time. What they're talking here is about activation cancellation. If I was able, well, I am able, when I would spam Warlock's Curse and pop Warlock's Bargain, my Warlock's Bargain would basically have no cast time. I'd be able to instantly cast it. I believe that's not going to be the case anymore. The animation cancellation techniques are kind of getting fixed for the Warlock. I believe they still work for the Great Weapon Fighter animation cancellation. But yeah, there's not very many for the Warlock, but there is a few. Well, that's not going to work with Warlock's Curse anymore, unfortunately. That's going to cover about 90% of the Warlock changes. There's some that I did not go over. I will leave a link to the full patch notes on the main website for ARC. So if you want to go back and read over them yourself, do a little theory crafting here. I do believe, as far as Mod 10 goes, guys, I am going to have a Damnation build and a Fury build. The Fury build is most likely going to be Hellbringer. The Damnation will most likely remain Soulbinder. The Soulbinder Damnation build is almost going to be the same. There's going to be a little differences. And then the Hellbringer Fury, we're going to have to do some testing, and we will see what the best build viable is for both. You guys have been asking a lot of questions lately. I know you guys have been patiently waiting, but the builds are coming. Like I said, Mod 10 does get released next Tuesday, which I believe is the 18th. The builds will come out about a week later, maybe 2 weeks later. It just really depends on how much testing I can get done and squeezed in. That's going to probably wrap it up for this video. I know this video is probably boring for most, but I just wanted to go over the Warlock patch notes, sort of talk about them a little bit. There's been a lot of misconception that everyone's always saying, you know, the Warlock nerf, the Warlock nerf, the Warlock nerf. This was not a nerf. This was not a nerf at all. This was actually a buff. they fixed the mechanics with 2 glitches. They fixed the mechanics with the soul puppets that should have never happened in the first place, and they also fixed the Killing Flames and Murderous Flame glitch. So yes, a lot of damage was taken away from the Warlock, but that damage should have never been there in the first place. Those are bugs within the game that should have been taken out long time ago. But all of the powers and most of the feats are actually getting increased in damage. I think every single power that the Warlock has is getting a significant increase. So you cannot call this class balance a nerf, not in any means possible. Cryptic is actually fixing their mistakes. They're going back, fixing their bugs and glitches and mechanics. And at the same time, they are actually buffing the Warlock. So the Warlock should still be viable. It should still be top-end DPS when played correctly. So guys, please just stop calling it that the Warlock's getting nerfed, because that's not the case. We're actually getting buffed. Now you want to talk about nerfs, the nerf to the Guardian Fighter Frey, that's a nerf. But it's an understandable nerf. Into the Frey's getting, instead of scaling from the damage resistance, it's getting just a flat increase of 30%, which is still pretty high, to be honest. Everything's going to be fine. You guys need to stop worrying. The Warlock will still thrive as DPS. There's going to be a few different play styles. It's all going to depend on how you want to play. Like I said, I'm only probably going to put out 2 builds and 2 god videos, as well as 2 rotation videos. But if you guys want to play the Warlock a different way, then that's perfectly fine. You can take the Hellbringer Fury and play it as a buff debuff instead of full DPS. So if that's your cup of tea, by all means. But that's going to wrap it up for today's video. Like I said, I know today's video was boring, especially if you don't play a Warlock. But I appreciate all you that did watch the video. We will see you guys next week in Mod 10.